is the Rosetta Stone. It was the key to understanding Egyptian hieroglyphics, and it is one of the most precious and valuable treasures of the British Museum. For more than 2 centuries, the Rosetta Stone has been our key to understanding ancient Egypt. The Rosetta Stone is a stila, so we have this very interesting interaction between these languages. We think that the text probably originally is a Greek text because to honor the pharaoh as a god, but parts of it have always been missing, whole lines erased by time. Now, AI has done what generations of experts couldn't. It's rebuilt the gaps, matched faint carvings to real words, and uncovered what the stone was really trying to say. Sholong guessed that the circular sign might be the sun, and he knew from Coptic that this had the sound ra. And what's emerging from those lost lines changes how we see ancient Egypt entirely. The Rosetta Stone, what we found and what we lost. It began in the scorching heat of an Egyptian summer, the final July of the 18th century. Napoleon's army was scattered across Egypt, building forts, digging trenches, and struggling against both the land and the climate. Near a small town called Rashid, known to Europeans as Rosetta, a young engineering officer named Pierre-Francois Boussard was overseeing repairs at a battered old fort called Fort Julien. As soldiers tore down a crumbling wall, something dark caught his eye, a smooth slab of black stone covered with rows of writing. It wasn't just another block of rubble. Boussard instantly knew it was something special. He stopped the demolition, ordered the stone lifted carefully, and sent word to Cairo. By mid-July 1799, the strange slab was already on its way to the capital for closer study. What they had found wasn't a statue or treasure. It was a fragment of an ancient royal decree carved more than 2,000 years earlier. The message on it appeared 3 times, written in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphic at the top, demonic in the middle, and ancient Greek at the bottom. The decree had come from a council of priests in the Egyptian city of Memphis, honoring their young king, Tammy V. Those 3 scripts are what made the discovery so extraordinary. Greek was still a readable language, and it became the bridge to unlock Egypt's long, silent words. The stone itself wasn't a towering monument like people often imagine. It was a compact block of dark, speckled granodiorite, a dense, volcanic stone harder than granite with tiny pink and gray minerals that sparkle under the light. It stands about 3 feet 8 inches tall, a little over 2.5 feet wide, and around 11 in thick, weighing roughly 1,675 pounds. Moving it required ropes, rollers, and a lot of care. Its modern journey began during a war. After months of siege, the French garrison in Alexandria surrendered to the combined British and Ottoman forces. The terms of surrender, known as the Capitulation of Alexandria, handed over all the antiquities collected by Napoleon scholars, including the black slab from Rosetta. By early 1802, the stone reached England. It was first shown to the Society of Antiquaries, then put on display at the British Museum, where it still stands today. Along its edges, white painted letters, still read, captured in Egypt by the British Army in 1801, presented by King George III. In Cairo, the printer, Jean-Joseph Marcel, made impressions directly from the surface of the stone. Another inventor, Nicola Jacques Conti, who had lost an eye in battle, went further. He inked the slab itself and pressed damp paper against it, creating perfect negatives of the carved letters. Back in London, the Society of Antiquaries ordered plaster casts for the universities of Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, and Dublin. Within months, engraved copies and rubbings were spreading across Europe and even reaching America. The Decree of Tommy Fay had become the first truly global text of its kind. The Greek section was the easiest to read, and by 1803, it was fully translated. It confirmed that the stone carried an official decree praising King Tommy and granting privileges to temples and priests. The demonic section, written in Egypt's everyday script, drew the attention of 2 brilliant linguists, the French scholar Sylvester Dassy and the Swedish diplomat Johann David Åkerblad. They noticed recurring patterns in royal names and realized that some of the symbols represented sounds. Then came the real turning point. A British polymath named Thomas Young compared the Greek names with the ones in Demotic and then studied the hieroglyphic section above. He noticed oval rings surrounding groups of symbols later called carts and guessed that they might contain royal names. Inside one, he managed to read the letters of Ptolemaeus or Tommy. It was a small leap, but a massive breakthrough. For the first time, scholars understood that hieroglyphs weren't just decorative symbols. They could stand for sounds. 2 decades later, in 1822, the mystery was finally solved. The young French scholar Jean-François Champollion announced that Egyptian hieroglyphs were a mix of pictures and phonetic signs, a real writing system, not a code of symbols. Using his deep knowledge of Coptic, the last descendant of ancient Egyptian speech, he proved that the hieroglyphs followed grammar and logic, like any language. On September 14th, he presented his findings to the Academy in Paris and fainted from excitement. Afterward, the ancient Egyptian language had come back to life, but the stone itself was still damaged. The top hieroglyphic section was the most ruined. Only 14 lines survived, with the rest eaten away on both sides. The demonic section has 32 lines, but the beginnings of 14 are gone. The Greek section holds 54 lines, though 26 lose their endings where the stone broke diagonally. That diagonal break gives away what the original monument once looked like. Similar royal decrees from the same era show that these stili usually had rounded tops carved with a scene of the king before the gods. Measurements from other examples suggest that about half a foot of hieroglyphic text once stood above the break. That missing upper piece has never been found. What remains is only about 2/3 of the original monument. Thankfully, the decree itself wasn't unique. The Greek text even orders that the same message be carved in the sacred script, the native script, and the Greek, and displayed in temples across Egypt. Because of that command, multiple copies were made, and some survived. Archaeologists have discovered several of these duplicates. A limestone stela from Nubra preserved sections missing from the Rosetta fragment. 2 more copies were carved on the temple walls at Pheli near Egypt's southern border. Others appeared at Espinas Elephantine and Necrotis. These versions aren't identical. Each one was slightly adjusted to its region. Some add the queen's name after her marriage to the king. Others emphasize different victories, like the reconquest of Thebes in the south or the defense of Leopolis in the north. None of them contradict the Rosetta version. They simply reflect local pride in politics. For modern scholars, those differences are priceless. When one copy ends mid-sentence, another usually continues it. By comparing them line by line, researchers can rebuild almost the entire decree with confidence. The direction of the writing helps too. The demonic lines read right to left. The Greek runs left to right, and the hieroglyphs arranged in small picture clusters also read right to left. Once you understand the writing directions, the missing sections make perfect sense. And because all 3 scripts carried the same message, one could often rescue what another had lost. Even so, some parts are still missing, and that's where AI now steps in. Using advanced imaging techniques, researchers can scan the surface of the stone in extreme detail, detecting faint carvings invisible to the human eye. Those scans create digital maps showing even the shallowest grooves. Machine learning models trained on thousands of hieroglyphic examples can then compare the patterns and suggest what might have once filled the gaps. The process doesn't invent anything. It simply finds patterns that match. The AI looks at damaged spots, compares them to surviving sections and to other copies of the decree, and predicts what the missing symbols likely were. The message itself was never a mystery. The decree praises Tommy V for his generosity, cutting taxes, giving land to temples, releasing prisoners, and ordering statues of the gods. It instructs that the decree be displayed in 3 scripts and placed in every major temple so that everyone from priests to scribes to Greek officials could read it. The Rosetta Stone was once the bridge that helped humans rediscover Egypt's lost language. Now it's the bridge between human discovery and artificial intelligence, which is uncovering the final symbols that time erased. Piece by piece, light and code are doing what even the sharpest minds of the 19th century couldn't, helping the stone speak again. how artificial intelligence read what time erased under the worn face of the Rosetta Stone. A faint message is still hiding. A voice from more than 2,000 years ago buried under scratches, chips, and the slow bite of time. To bring that voice back, scientists didn't start by translating. They started by looking with tools that could see what the human eye can't. The first step was light. The team behind what's now called the Digital Rosetta Stone project began by photographing the entire surface again and again, each time from a different angle and with light hitting from a different direction. Every tiny shift in lighting makes a groove cast a shadow or a ridge gleam. When you blend all those photos together, you get a height map, a kind of three-dimensional picture that records every rise and dip in the stone surface. It turns the slab into a digital landscape. You can tilt it, zoom in, and move the light across it, revealing details smaller than a grain of sand. Places that once looked smooth suddenly come alive with tiny carvings. But shape alone isn't always enough. The Rosetta Stone was once painted, and although the color has long faded, traces of pigment remain deep inside the grooves. To capture them, researchers used hyperspectral imaging, a kind of photography that goes far beyond ordinary color. Instead of just red, green, and blue, hyperspectral cameras collect hundreds of shades of light, including those invisible to human eyes. Under certain wavelengths, minerals, pigments, and even old tool marks glow in different ways. What looks empty in normal light can suddenly reveal the ghost of a missing sign. By stacking those invisible colors together, conservators could pull hidden details back into view. Still, light and color are only half the battle. The next step was to teach computers how to read the shapes carved into that stone. Ancient Egyptian writing doesn't run neatly in straight lines like modern text. Symbols cluster together, overlapping and stacking. Birds perched above loaves of bread, serpents coiling beside reeds. To a computer, that chaos is just a maze of lines. So researchers trained an artificial intelligence model to find and outline each sign one by one. They began with thousands of photos showing falcons, eyes, snakes, and other Egyptian symbols, teaching the system what each one looks like. The model they used was originally built to recognize people or cars in ordinary photos, but after retraining, it learned a new task to trace the ancient signs etched into the stone's face. Once trained, it could automatically separate every symbol, even where the carvings overlap or fade together. The result is remarkable. Every tiny bird, eye, and coil of rope now has its own clean digital outline, as if the stone itself had been given an invisible highlighter. But recognizing shapes is only the beginning. The next question is, what do those shapes mean when they sit together? For that, another kind of AI is used, one that understands patterns the way people understand language. Modern transformer models like the ones that power translation software can learn the rhythm of words. In this case, they learn the rhythm of hieroglyphs. By studying thousands of Egyptian texts, these models discover that certain symbols tend to appear together, just as in English. Thank is usually followed by you. This pattern-based understanding helps fill in missing spots. When the edge of the stone is broken and a few symbols are gone, the model can look at what comes before and after and predict what likely fits in between. That's exactly what one recent project called the Hieroglyphic Transformer set out to do. Using data from the Berlin-based Theoris Linguae Egypti, the largest collection of Egyptian writings in the world, researchers trained a model that could take sequences of hieroglyphs and suggest which signs might be missing. It's not guessing at random. It uses the habits of the language itself to narrow down possibilities. This combination, one AI to see the shapes and another to understand them, is what makes the modern Rosetta project work. The visual model identifies the carvings that still exist. The language model uses context to fill in gaps. Together, they can restore lines that haven't been fully readable since the ancient world. Interestingly, the roots of this idea come from work on other ancient scripts. In 2019, researchers built an AI system called Pythia that could predict missing letters in damaged Greek inscriptions. When a stone was too cracked to read, the model compared it to thousands of known examples and offered a short list of possible restorations. In about 3 out of every 4 cases, the correct answer appeared among its top suggestions. Later, another AI system called Ithaca expanded this idea. It not only restored lost text, but could estimate when and where the writing was made. In real tests, historians using Ithaca worked faster and more accurately than before. For the Rosetta Stone, this kind of model is invaluable, because there are several surviving copies of the same decree carved in different places, like Nubber and Phi. AI can instantly compare them all and highlight which phrases match. What used to take weeks of cross-referencing now takes seconds. By 2025, the same idea had reached Latin texts. DeepMind created an AI system called Aeneas, built to search damaged writings for matches in other ancient records. It can scan both text and images to find fragments that share the same names or phrases. When all these steps come together, the restoration of the Rosetta Stone feels seamless. First, researchers build the perfect image. They take thousands of photos under changing lights and blend them to create a three-dimensional map of the surface. Even the shallowest carvings, the ones invisible to the naked eye, suddenly appear. Next, they run AI that outlines every remaining sign. Then, each outline is turned into a digital ID, a kind of fingerprint that says, "This is a falcon," or "This is a reed leaf." Once the symbols are identified, they're lined up with the other two scripts on the same stone, demonic and Greek, because all three carry the same message. When the hieroglyphics section breaks off, the system doesn't stop. It automatically looks to the other surviving copies of the decree found elsewhere in Egypt. If a missing sentence on the Rosetta Stone matches a complete one at Nubra, the AI uses that as a guide. Even the Greek version helps because its neat rows of letters show how long each line of text should be. By comparing all three languages and every surviving copy, the system can figure out how many signs fit into the missing space and which ones actually belong there. Behind all this are two projects that made it possible for computers to even recognize hieroglyphs at all. The first is Google's Fabricius, launched in 2020, which gave both scholars and the public a way to explore Egyptian symbols online and label them for training data. The second is Ubisoft's Hieroglyphics initiative, created with Egyptologists to gather thousands of hand-tagged hieroglyph images. Together, these efforts gave AI the foundation it needed to learn what each sign really looks like. When the models suggest possible readings for a damaged line, the next step is to check their work. That's where Egypt's great dictionaries and databases come in. The Thesaurus Linguae Egypti lets researchers search every known occurrence of a word across 3,000 years of Egyptian writing. The Chicago Demonic Dictionary, built over decades, explains how each word was used in law, trade, and religion. The same kind of language found on the Rosetta Stone's middle section. These references act like referees. If an AI suggestion breaks Egyptian grammar or uses a word that doesn't exist anywhere else, it's rejected. If it matches a known phrase from another copy of the decree, it passes. A major strength of these AI tools is transparency. They don't simply spit out an answer, they show how they got there. Systems like Ithaca and Aeneas list every source they compared, every matching phrase they found, and even how confident they are in each suggestion. That means any scholar can retrace the logic and decide whether they agree. Of course, the technology has limits. AI can't invent carvings that never existed, and experts are careful to avoid what they call forcing the fit or making the stone say whatever the computer predicts. The physical evidence always comes first. If the three-dimensional map shows a groove that doesn't match the model's choice, the groove wins. If a proposed word would take up more space than the stone allows, it's wrong. Now that those lost lines have reappeared, one question remains. What do they actually say? Do these restored words change how we understand the decree, the priests who wrote it, or the young king they praised? The real message behind the Rosetta Stone. When the missing lines of the Rosetta Stone were finally brought back, something incredible happened. The slab turned into a living story about how ancient Egypt really worked. It was politics, money, and people. More than 2,000 years ago, Egypt was a land trying to hold itself together after years of chaos. Tommy V sat on the throne, and the country's most powerful figures weren't soldiers or governors. They were priests. They ran the temples, controlled the land, and spoke for the gods. If the king wanted peace, he needed them on his side. That's what the Rosetta Decree was really about. Once the lost lines are restored, it reads like a deal written in stone, a promise traded for loyalty. The king gave out favors, and the priests returned the favor with praise carved into walls. The decree lists money, tax cuts, grain, and forgiveness. It also describes what the priests would do in return. Daily prayers, grand festivals, and a cycle of ceremonies that made the king look like the chosen one of the gods. The Greek text gives the clearest summary. It says the king had cut some taxes and abolished others completely to make life easier for both soldiers and farmers. It also confirms that the temples would keep their own income, their land, their vineyards, their silver and grain safe from government control. Even the priest's own tax rate was frozen so it could never rise again. It might sound like boring accounting, but in Egypt this was survival. The decree also tells us about compassion. It says the king freed prisoners who had been wrongly jailed and ended forced service, which often tore families apart. He even sent supplies and gifts to care for Egypt's sacred animals, especially the holy bulls that were believed to be living forms of the gods. Even the Nile itself became part of this story. The Greek section mentions that in the king's 8th year, the river flooded far higher than expected. Instead of a disaster, the king turned it into a victory by ordering the extra water held back for farmers. To the people of Egypt, this was no small gesture. The Nile was their lifeline. Too little water meant famine. Too much meant ruin. Writing this act into a public decree told every farmer from the delta to the desert that the palace cared and that the gods approved. In return, the priests promised new festivals celebrating his birthday and coronation, daily offerings before his statue, and songs praising his name in every temple. Every chant and every ritual would remind the people who their savior was. It wasn't just faith, it was good publicity. And the decree didn't stay in one place. It ordered copies to be carved in every temple. And that's exactly what happened in Upper Egypt. The southern copies praised the king's reconquest of Thebes after years of rebellion in the delta. The northern ones celebrated his victory at Lycopololus. Later copies even added new details like the name of Cleopatra I after she married the king. The completed text also clears up one of the biggest mysteries. Which version came first? Most evidence now suggests that the demonic, the fast, everyday Egyptian script was the original draft. It reads more naturally like a government document. The Greek translation is clunky or sometimes awkward, as if written second. A line about building a shrine for the king flows smoothly and demonic, but stumbles in Greek. Even the hieroglyphics section written in the sacred temple style leaves out a few clarifying signs. The same balance shows up in the way taxes are described. The Greek text uses formal bureaucratic terms, the language of law. The demonic says the same thing, but in the tone of a local clerk writing a contract. When the missing lines are restored, both panels move almost word for word together. That finally kills the old myth that the Egyptian parts were just ceremonial. They weren't. They carried the same legal weight, just written in the language Egyptians actually used. Restoring the lines also fixes the timeline. The decree is dated to the 9th year of the king's reign and ties itself to festivals and anniversaries. The location of the decree also matters. It wasn't issued at the royal capital of Alexandria, but in Memphis, the old heart of Egypt, where kings were crowned and the powerful priests of Ptah held sway. That choice was strategic. Memphis was where religion, politics, and history overlapped. Thanks for watching. Now, check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.